And General Yamashita that if he takes Bukit Timah Hill, then Percival is bound to surrender, isn't he? No, Percival didn't see it that way. He thought that the fall of Bukit Timah Hill was a minor annoyance. Yamashita was sitting on top of this hill now, and he could see Singapore and everything around Singapore from the top of the hill. And he actually flew aircraft over Singapore to drop leaflets to say, "Oi, Percival, game's up, pal. I've taken the high ground. I've taken your main storage area at the Turf City Racecourse. It's all going to finish." And Percival went, "Nah, not quite." So what Yamashita wanted to do was force Percival's hand, and he wanted to launch an attack from the west into the city. But he had another objective. He wanted to cut the water supply off from the city. And where are we? West over there, Bukit Timah that way. What's that way? Makrichi Reservoir. So what he wanted to do is drive his forces down here, go up to Thompson Village, cut off the reservoir from the city, as well as put pressure on the city perimeter itself. So when we see the history books, we read them and they say that Yamashita wanted to drive into the city. He had a better plan than that. He was trying to force Percival's hand all the time. Remember, Yamashita had 1/3 the amount of men than the Allies had in Singapore. When you attack some place, you're meant to have 3 times the amount than the defenders have, especially a city. He was the other way around. He was putting one great big bluff, and he wanted to drive down here and end the fighting as fast as he could. And he saw the reservoirs, cut the water supply off. That would be the ultimate. So what happened? On the 13th, 14th and 15th of February 1942, the fighting goes on down at Bukit Timah. Yamashita is coming down the Bukit Timah Road, trying to cut off the reservoir, and Percival only has one more option, the 18th Division. The boys from the 18th have got off of the ships on the 29th of January 1942. They've been in Singapore for 1 week. I remember being in Singapore for 1 week, and I was out of my depth, man. I was sweating buckets. I had no idea what was going on around me, no idea about the temperature, no idea about the mosquitoes and the bugs. And this was the same thing happened to the Cambridgeshires and the Suffolks and the guys from the 1st 5th Foresters from Derbyshire in the UK. They landed on the ships, they came here and they were expected to fight. They had 1 week to sort themselves out. 1 week. The Cambridgeshires, for example, ended up at Seletar Airfield, up to the north. And they stayed there for the first week, hearing all the guns firing over on the west, thinking, what the hell's going on? And on the 12th and 13th of February, they were shipped down here to form a stop line that runs all the way down Lornie Road, right down Adam Road, onto Farrer Road, and all the way down past Tanglin, past Alexandra and to the coast. So where you're standing today, here along this line, is the last stop line that Percival set up, the last defensive positions. And why is this called Hellfire Corner? You've got Lornie, you've got Adam, you've got Sime Road, and in those days Sime Road took you all the way to Bukit Timah. It's one of the main routes in, other than the Bukit Timah Road. So what's happening is he wanted to form the stop line here, he put his line of troops along here, and when you look around you, you can see, this is what I talk about looking at the landscape. We're high up because we're on a bridge, but actually Hellfire Corner is on top of the hill. We're on Bukit Brown, we're on top of the hill here, and when you've got 2 crossroads crossing on top of the hill, you can see them from a great distance, especially if you're in an airplane going across. They become a landmark. And so visible were they from Bukit Timah that Yamashita and his artillery guys could watch the crossroads. And every time a truck pulled up, wham, they used to throw in the artillery. And so the British got this place known as Hellfire Corner, because every time they crossed it, it brought a hell of a lot of fire into the zone. One Cambridgeshire guy, a guy called Lance Corporal Jack Cosford, remembers sitting on top just by the break in the trees there. You can see where the end of the green is, where the end of the golf course is, where the hedgerow finishes. He's sitting in a truck just on the road up there, waiting his turn. And his colour sergeant major is saying to him, he's got a clock, he's going, go! And in a 15-ton truck, which don't go very fast, very quickly. Pedal to the metal, he would go across the crossroads, 2 or 3 of the trucks would rattle across here, under cover of the Hill 95 here and the forest here, hoping that they did it fast enough before the Japanese could go, ah, there they are, fire in on them. And he managed to do it, but the Japanese got canny. They realised that when the truck got across the crossroads, they were going to stop down there. So they started lobbing bombs into Adam Drive and caught the guys open on Adam Drive. So this is why Hellfire Corner gets its name. Sime Road, crossroads with Lornie and Adam. Right, before I lose my voice, we're going to head down now and head in that direction. Claire's going to give me a watch of my time so we don't overrun. If you're feeling tired, stick your hand up.
Slow down.
How's that? Nice and quiet. Much better. Landscapes. We look around as you think, hey, we could be onto something here. This is old stuff. This looks like a fairly old house, one of the black and white houses. It's painted black and white, therefore it must be old. The Adam Park black and white houses are 1928. That's fairly old for Singapore. That's pushing it back somewhat. So yeah, what are we looking at? What can we see around us? Well, this is Sime Road. This is Sime Road Prison Camp, among other things. It's one of the main gates in to the COC, the Command and Control Centre, which was set up prior to the war. Now, story has it that when Brooke Popham came here, and he was in charge of the whole shooting match in Southeast Asia. When Brooke Popham came here, he had a problem with Singapore, a big problem. He had his command centres split up between various sites. He had the army down at the battle box. He had the navy up at Sembuang, and the RAF were building a headquarters here. And that didn't really ring true when it came to communications, because we just can't pick up a phone like we did in these days. It was all wired communications and running runners and motorcyclists buzzing around these places, trying to coordinate a campaign which was happening actually in Malaya. So we thought, right, okay, we're going to have to pull these guys together. So when General Percival came out here, he was faced with the same problem. He looked at the battle box, it was too small, and he thought, well, I'm going to have to actually talk to the other guys, the RAF, I'm going to have to talk to the Navy. And he was great friends with the guy called Pulford, who was the AOC in command of the RAF. And they were just thinking about setting up this wonderful RAF command point up here. And so, so Percival decided that he'd probably move his command next to the RAF. So the Army and the RAF are cooperating together. The Navy, okay, we can live with them being over at Sembuang for a wee while. So they had great plans in 1939 into turning this place into a great command centre. But things turned bad when the war started, and they didn't leave them enough time. They threw money at it. They threw money which wasn't even budgeted for. And back in London, there was a whole hoo-ha when Percival demanded that he would get, I think it was about $12,000 pounds sterling, sorry, to try and start building this place up. An awful lot of money, and they didn't agree with it, and they just built it anyway. They built it as cheap as they can, and it wasn't an impressive building as we might think of the command centre today. It was mainly Nissan huts, all lined up in a row, and on one side of the Nissan huts was a whole bunch of army guys, and across the courtyard on the other side was a whole bunch of RAF guys, and somewhere out there was this thing called the plotting room. It sounds quite devious, but that's where the command and control centre was. And just like you see on all the Battle of Britain photographs and the command centres, there was a balcony and a big plotting table, the big map of Malaya, and they were shoving these little markers around to say what was happening in the Malayan campaign. So there was this combination of people. I mean, it got so bad here, so crowded, as the war kicked off, it got so crowded here that the Commander-in-Chief, Pulford, was in this house up here. This was his accommodation, and he gave the accommodation up, and he handed it over to the adminers, and he went to live with Percival. Now there's a great debate, and some of you guys might know more about this than I do. There's a great debate to say where my command house was. If you read Roman Bose's book about the battle box, he suggests that actually both these houses were built in 1940, and they were side by side. And so when Pulford gave up his house, he actually moved next door to go and live with Percival, suggesting that it was that house. Well, actually, I don't think that's the case. People might be able to put their hand up and add to the argument here. I think the command house where Percival lived is the big house down Kheam Hock Road. Does everybody know where that is? Kheam Hock Road Command House. So you go right down. Thank you very much, that's right. And it's a big camp, very nice house, very posh, very splendid. And that, I believe, is Command House, and that was Percival's HQ, and that's where Pulford went in. And it was kind of next door, because it's just in a bit of a ride down the road to Kheam Hock. So why do we say this? Well, what are we looking at? If you go to the Changi Museum, and search through their archives, there is a map. Just share that one between 5 or something like that. And this is, we've had this made up. This is the stylized version of the map which you can find in Changi Museum.
You can hold it.
Any more? Here we go. We've got one more in the centre here. It's quite a nice map, isn't it? And here's the original. I think I've got the original in here. That's what the original looked like. So you can see, and it was done by civilian internees who were here in 1944. So that's the original, and what we've done is had the map made up so you can see all the detail on it. And where we're standing around about there, that junction where it says police post. Just where it says police post. Got it? That's it. Perfect. Police post.
Okay.
Here, and you're looking in, and on the left it says Nipponese HQ, Japanese HQ. So that was called the Green House by the civilian internees.
Oh yes, so it's this way.
And that's that house over there. So as you're studying that, let's just go back about the history of this place. On the 11th of January 1942, things are getting a bit tough for the Brits. They're starting to line up this defensive line here, but the Japanese are just down the bottom of the golf course, about 2 miles away. And at that point, Percival, who was here in the command centre here, thought, let's scoot, man, and he headed off into town to the battle box. So when you tour the battle box, and it says that where the final decision was made and all that, this is where the Malayan campaign was run from. It wasn't. It was actually run from here, and it was only in the last few days that the whole show went over to the battle box. So, during the fighting, there was fighting around this area. We'll come on to that a bit later. But soon after that, 2 months after the surrender, the Japanese decide that they look at the whole city of Singapore. They think, oh, it's looking a bit of a mess. How can we fix it all up? And they decide they're going to push out all the guys, all the prisoners have been held at Changi, about 160,000 of them, all over in Changi. They were going to split them out, and they're going to get them to repair Singapore. And one of the projects they would like to do, Yamashita was very keen on, is building the Shinto shrine. Notice board at the end there will tell you a bit more about the Shinto shrine. Has anybody been there?
Been there.
Yeah, the diehards. Look at that. Yeah, the diehards. It's almost impossible to find. I think you'll agree. You've got to know where you're going. It's actually in McRitchie Nature Reserve, just on the other side of McRitchie Reservoir. There are no signposts. There are no this way to the shrine, and it's pretty hard going.
The Japanese are still visiting.
Been up there recently?
The last time I went there, I saw some Japanese writing on a piece of cloth and some sake cups.
Absolutely fantastic.
Japanese are still visiting there.
It's a secret. I'm not allowed to tell you. If you want to go up there, you've got to preserve the biodiversity of the site. That's what the national parks say. They don't encourage people to go up there because they're preserving the biodiversity. What is up there is a massive. The actual Shinto shrine was burnt down in 1945, most likely by the Japanese. And what's left for the archaeologists to look at are the platforms on which the Shinto shrine is built on, and there are 15-foot embankments with stone cladding around it, which were built by the prisoners. 10,000 prisoners were used to build the Shinto shrine, and all the golf course here was made into a Japanese garden. So there's a lot of landscaping going on around here, all done by the Japanese, by the prisoners, 10,000 of them. Now, to house 10,000 guys, where are you going to put them? Yamashita decided he was going to use 5 housing estates. I know this because Adam Park was camp number 1, and they shoved 3,000 guys into Adam Park, and we can pick up the archaeology of that at Adam Park. They also used the Sime Road headquarters, the Caldecott estate, the Mount Pleasant estate, and the Lornie Road married quarters, which is just on the other side of the road on the far side. And they housed the 10,000 guys in there, and every morning used to march over through the gardens, over to the Shinto shrine and start building. And it took them 9 months to put that down. After the 9 months, the prisoners were then moved out. They either went to up country, to Thai and Burma, or the Adam Park guys first came here to Sime Road before they were shipped back to Changi, and then before they were shipped up country. So there was a movement of POWs through and around this area. On top of that, in 1944, Adam Park was then actually renovated and handed back to the Japanese, and the Japanese government actually put people in them, rented them out and put people in. Sime Road stood vacant for about a couple of years. In 1944, troops were being brought back from Thai Burma in preparation of preparing the islands for a defence against the forthcoming British invasion. They were putting the guys back. They put them into Changi. Changi got so crowded that they decided to move the civilian internees out, and they needed somewhere to put them, so they chose Sime Road. And so when you hear about Sime Road, most of the inference, most of the story you know about is the civilians who are in here in 1944. They walked into the site and they found the place like an absolute pigsty, because it had been a prisoner of war camp beforehand, which had been abandoned a couple of years before. So what does that mean about the archaeology? We've got this use, reuse, we've got COC going on, we've got prisoners here, we've got civilian internees here. One thing that's a common factor, every time somebody pitched off at Adam Park, they said, oh, what a mess. There's no building standing. So all the ATAP buildings, all the wooden buildings, all the Nissen huts had all collapsed either during the fighting or because being abandoned or whatever. And every time there's a degree of rebuild goes on. So where are they rebuilding all this stuff? Well, if you look around the place, you'll see a whole bunch of concrete plinths. Every house, every building is built on a concrete plinth. Why? Because the drainage system that supports the concrete plinths around it is still intact. So when the guys came in again, they saw a wrecked building, they would knock it down and build on the concrete plinth. In 1947, 46 and 47, when this place returned back to being a command centre, they did exactly the same thing. They came here and they built on the concrete plinths. So the buildings you see today are on the same plinths, the same area as the buildings were in 1942 and 1944 that the prisoners were using. And I personally think, when you look at these buildings on the left-hand side and you look at your map, you'll find there's a great correlation between these buildings and your maps. Now that's the investigation. If anyone wants to come and volunteer to help out, that's the theory. We're going to go and try and look at the Adam Parks, the Adam Drive site, the Sime Road site, and see if we can see the original buildings in the landscape. One thing for sure, on the back you can see a picture. The photograph is taken of a long line of huts. And if you flip back to your map and compare the two, the long line of huts is this long line here. This long line of huts here. Okay, so that long line of huts that picture is taken from, flip over, is that long line of huts here. So you're standing looking at that long line of huts. If you look over there, what do you see? A nice big house. Obviously not a long line of huts. That house is a post-war house. All this area used to be the Sime Road barracks, and that long line of huts is basically where that house stood. That's our problem, ladies and gentlemen. We've got to recreate the landscape. We're looking at photographs of the Sime Road POW camp. Where is it in the landscape? Just at the back of that house, there is a flag. There used to be an area, a park area, which had a flagstaff sitting in it. That flagstaff is actually here during the war, during the internment camp. and it's reputedly the first flagstaff to have a Union Jack flying from it at the end of the fighting. The internees were quick off the mark. On September the 3rd, they put up the flagstaff here, the Union Jack. So the place in itself has a very historical bias to it. You've just got to be able to see it in the landscape. Unfortunately, we're not here to talk about Sime Road. We're here to talk about battlefields. So where's the battlefield? Well, actually, there's a more ancient landscape, a more battle-related landscape here at this spot. It's that. That golf course was here in 1942. That golf course is our battlefield, not this area here. So when you turn around and have a look at this, that's where the troops are fighting. Singapore Island Country Club golf course dates back prior to the war. This is the terrain where the fighting took place. And we're going to walk a little way further back up. There's a better viewing point of the terrain here, and talk about the fighting that took place on the golf course. I haven't had the audacity yet to talk to the chairman of the Singapore Island Country Club and ask him if he can dig up his battlefield. Maybe one day, huh? So we'll walk up, back up to the road, the next big opening on the left-hand side, not far, and we'll talk about some battlefields. We talk about battlefields, and you think there's more battlefield on that side because it's untouched. Well, actually, there's more battlefield on this side of the road than there is on that side of the road. Because this area has been perfectly preserved because of golfers. Because of the golfers and preserving their. Now, anybody belong to the golf course? Don't think you do. Just a little bit of history. By 1942, you have a golf club house on the far side. On the 11th of February 1942, the 11th Regiment of the 5th Division of the Japanese is right at the far end of the golf course, heading in this direction. And there is a book out there called The Guns of February by a guy called Professor Free of the NUS. Get it, because it tells you, the Guns of February, it tells you of the Singapore campaign from the Japanese perspective. And one of those accounts is a guy called Lieutenant Oki, and he's with the 11th Regiment, and he actually tells you about attacking the golf course clubhouse. He's in the line of the plantation at the far end. He looks out and he suggests there's about 800 meters of golf course to get across before you get to the golf course clubhouse. Now, anybody been in the army? Any national service guys? He'll tell you that that is a hell of a long way to run when you're full of kit and somebody's shooting at you. And if you look at it and you're uphill and you look at the terrain, there is no cover. So one man with a machine gun should, in theory, be able to hold you up for a long time. Oki and his comrades in the 11th decided they were going to attack the clubhouse, and they did so with a banzai charge. They just got up out and ran as fast as they could towards the clubhouse. And they took the Australians and the British who were manning the place completely by surprise and overran the clubhouse. They found a whole bunch of stores in there, and they spent the rest of the day having a bit of knees off, drinking what they called Churchill's rations, which were everything the British left behind them. So the actual clubhouse has since been burnt down and moved around, and it's been rebuilt. But down there, that's a battlefield. With the 11th Regiment and the 41st Regiment, who fought at Adam Park, with this thing called the 5th Division, they had a number of tanks, and the tanks belonged to the 6th Tank Regiment. And among those guys was a guy called Colonel Shimada. And Shimada has left us with a very, very good account of the fighting here at Adam Park. Sorry, Adam Park. Sime Road. He pulls 8 of his tanks down the golf course. He's the lead element of the Japanese advance. There is only him and his tanks in the front. Everybody else is behind him. And he comes stonking across the golf course. Imagine me telling this to the greenkeepers now. Chiha tanks, Tank 97s, come pulling up, come racing across the golf course. They drop behind this ridge here, and see where the golf. You can see how you look at that golfer there. Yeah, you can only see half his body, because you can see the extent of the slope. Shimada brings his tanks up to this is record ridge 105, and he puts his tanks just on the other side of there. Now he's the advance unit on the 13th of February 1942. All hell's breaking loose at Adam Park. Things are happening in front of him, but he's the advance unit, and he has no infantry support, and the whole advance grinds to a halt on the 13th of February. And for the duration of the 13th, Shimada and his 8 tanks are sat down underneath that ridge line. Now that's very, very confident. Why is that a real confident move? Because there's no Allied air power. You don't leave your tanks out in the open if the British have got air cover. So his planes were going up and down. He didn't have to worry about that being out in the open. But what he was frightened of was incoming British artillery fire. And there's a very well publicised account in the Adam Park fight, which says that the guys in Adam Park actually spotted tanks moving along the Sime Road. You think, how do you do that? You can't see Adam Park from there. Somehow they could see tanks moving along, and if you take away all this foliage, you can actually, when you do the topographic study of the area, you can actually get to the house in Adam Park and look across, and you can actually see elements of Sime Road. The forest you see around you was just simply not here in 1942. So you could actually see across. And the British at Adam Park lobbed in about 60 rounds of 3-inch mortars along this road, and they say, don't they, the British say, that they took out 6 tanks. How can you take out tanks with a mortar round? Well, what was happening is that the guys, the Japanese, were meant to be so relaxed, they had their canopies open, and the bombs went inside, dropped inside, and were killing them, taking them out because they fell inside the tank. That's the story. Only the archaeology will prove us right or wrong on that, for sure. Shimada, the day before though, he was quite happy. He realised that there's a whole load of bombardment coming in here, and he had his guys hold down all day. Now think about that. You're in a bath, a tin bath. You pull down your canopy, and it's in this kind of weather conditions, and it started to sweat, and these boys are wringing with sweat, and they were drinking water as fast as they can, and the water was tepid. It tasted of diesel and oil. It came out of the tanks that were actually inside the tank itself. It was a horrible, horrible condition. And every time they opened up, there was a chance they were going to get killed with shrapnel raining down on them, so they had to close down again. The only way they could communicate, they didn't have any radios in Japanese tanks, the only way they could communicate was to shout across to each other, and that involved literally one guy getting out of the tank, running along to the next, banging on the hatch saying, "Oi, do that," and going back. That's dangerous. So you imagine what it must have been like for these boys sitting in these tanks for a day as the shell fire came rolling in. Relief was at hand for Shimada though, because after about a day of sitting here, a little Har-Go tank came scurrying across. A bit like a Har-Go tank is half the size of a Chi-Ha tank. It's a little bit like a golf cart, an armoured golf cart, for want of a better analogy. And it came scooting across here, and his commander knocked on his tank hatch and said, "Right, we're going in, boys, and we're going in tonight at 12 o'clock on the 14th. And that's the story we're going to look at further up, back up at the main road. Okay, let's move along.
Who's the author of Guns of February?
Fry, F-R-E-I, Professor, Guns of February. 14th of February. 14th, remember the surrender is the next day. So this is the final push, the final battle. Yamashita still wants to drive towards the reservoirs. He's going to launch an attack. Adam Park, just down there, is not falling. It's not breaking. He's looking for the soft spot in the line. The soft spot in the line is behind us. The 4th Suffolk Regiment are lined up in trenches on Bukit Brown, Cemetery Hill. The Japanese called it Cemetery Hill. So if you look at the map, it's covered in Chinese cemetery. They looked at it very straightforward. Shimada looked across here, and he looked at the hill, and he realised that the cemetery was not good tank country. Now what do we mean by that? The average Japanese tank is about a third bigger than that vehicle there. It's about a third heavier than that vehicle there. So they're not big things. They're not great big massive Pink Tigers, Panther tanks that we see in the German campaigns. They're pretty small things. And he looked across there and he saw the Chinese gravestones, and he saw what he called towers. And towers were the pillars that were set up, concrete pillars, and he looked across at that kind of terrain and went, "Oh my God, if I drive my tank across that kind of terrain, what's going to happen is the tank's going to get hung up and fall over and be dislodged." It's like Dragon's Teeth and Normandy. It's the same idea. You put concrete pillars up, you can't drive your tanks over it. And he looked over onto those hills up there and saw what you see today. He saw all these Chinese gravestones and realised he couldn't put his tanks through it. So he needed infantry support. And so what Yamashita did is he called upon the 3rd Battalion of the 5th Regiment, sorry, 3rd Battalion, 11th Regiment, 5th Division, the Ichikawa Battalion from Hiroshima. Ichikawa was their colonel. All the units were named after the colonel who's in charge of them, and he got them to charge up the road. And at 9 o'clock on the 14th of February 1942, 400 guys ran up this road, basically, and went across the road here. And they were heading towards a one point which they could see on the hill. And that was the old temple in the middle of the Bukit Brown Cemetery, which is and then you turn left and we'll finish our tour up there. So in the pitch black, Shimada was asked to give him fire support, and Shimada's tanks pulled themselves up onto the ridge and opened up with 2-pounder guns, 8 of them, peppering the slopes here. And what Shimada described is pretty awful. He watches the shells hit the concrete, hit the brickwork, and the arms and legs of the Suffolk Regiment were thrown into the air by the shrapnel which is induced when you hit concrete with a shell. So not only the shell fragments that the boys had to cope with, but actually the concrete as the gravestones exploded and were hit. And you could watch the one by one the positions of the Suffolks being taken out by the Ichikawa guys who came right up this road straight across there. Imagine doing that in the pitch black. For the Ichikawa boys, it was a run into hell. They literally saw it as a sacred ground where the ghosts live. And they weren't particularly happy about fighting on the graveyard. But they pulled on their equipment, they latched on their bayonets. It was going to be a bayonet attack. They had very little ammunition left. In fact, one of the reasons why they had to do it at night rather than during the day is because the supporting companies, their machine gun companies, didn't have any ammunition left. Only 20 seconds of some of the machine guns. 20 seconds of ammunition, not a lot left. So the lads had to come up here, charge across the road in a full frontal bayonet attack, right into the heart of prepared positions, into what they saw as sacred ghostly grounds. You can imagine it was a bit of a charge for them. Shimada from the ridge could spot the position of the advancing infantry because in the moonlight shone off the swords of the NCOs and the officers in the Japanese ranks. You could see the swords glistening. That was the only way you could see the approach of the infantry as they disappeared into the murk on the far side of the road. What that means to the Suffolk guys, we'll discuss when we finish the tour on the other side. But I'm going to divert you down now, and I wanted to go and show you how the landscape can be scarred from World War II. Just going to walk down a bit further. Field. Tanks are rolling up here, the Ichikawa Battalion rolling up here. So you think it may be scarred, there may be debris across there, certainly is. I haven't had the guts to ask to dig this place up. However, how many people have been down this track? Yeah, how many people know over there a whole bunch of trenches and dugouts? Nah, it's all in there, guys. This position was a part of the Allied stop line set up on the 13th, 12th and the 13th. They're actually Cambridgeshire's positions. There are in that Bondu there are a number of depressions. We believe, at the moment we call them features. We do not call them anything else, but until we prove otherwise, there are a number of features which appear to be slit trenches. There was also, you can see some tremendous amount of undulation which is going on in this area. Perhaps those features are shell craters, we're not sure. However, it's not that I want to talk to you about. One of the things we did when we researched the Bukit Brown area, we went to the records which are now held in Kew Gardens. They are called the Bureau of Record and Inquiry documents. Now the Bureau of Record and Inquiries was an organisation set up in Changi, and the organisation was that the idea was that for every man that came into Changi, he was questioned to ask, where did you come from, what's your regiment, what's your name, take your details, and do you know anything about anybody else? And from these records being kept, they managed to build up a dossier, basically a register of every prisoner that came through. And as these boys moved out to various camps, these records were then annotated in handwriting to say where they went. And they became the best records ever kept in a prison camp to say for the movement of the troops. And it gives you, if you want to research your next of kin or want to know about any of the troops moving through Changi, you'll end up undoubtedly looking at the Bureau of Record Inquiry documents. Now, if you asked me this about 2 years ago, I would have said, well, there's no records at all, because they were officially lost. And they've only been found again last year, in November last year. Why? It's because it's like Indiana Jones and the Ark of the Lost Covenant. This box of records was taken from Changi and sent to India and joined the army, went back to the army. And then the army lost it, disappeared, went into the archives and was never found. It's taken 70 years for them to work out where these records are, and they are actually in the National Archives in Kew Gardens. So they started digging them out, and if any FEPAL person, any person studying this campaign worth their salt, will go and have a look at the particular records for your particular regiment. And for us, it's the 4th Suffolk Regiment, who is up here, and I think I have a photocopy somewhere of an example of that. Anyway, the records, this is what they look like. You've got to have good eyesight. Can you read that? Because if you can, you're a better man than I am, Gungadin, because I cannot read that. It takes a lot of studying. So you have to go to Kew Gardens and sit there, or you get one of your friends to go to Kew Gardens, photo it, and send it to you by email. And that's what we've done. And that's the 4th Suffolk. And you can just about make out the names of the guys who have been killed. And I'll just read you this one. It says Private Shield, JA, killed in Singapore, 14th of the 2nd, 42. He was buried by Reverend J. Foster Haig, corner of the wood, golf course, and then it has a grid reference, 814417. That grid reference is here. Now the thing about Shields and 4 other guys is that they are officially missing. If you go up to Cranji and have a look for their names, you'll not find them on a headstone, you will find them on the wall. That infers that they have gone missing and their bodies are not found. It infers that they are still here. The guys who are with him are a guy called Private Fred Double. He's out there somewhere. He comes from Suffolk. Colour Sergeant George Marler, he's from Lowestoft. Shields, he was originally from Brierley Hill in the West Midlands, very close to where I come from. And Private Fred Sprules, who died at the age of 28, he comes from the Great Western Road, Paddington, London. They're probably still behind you, watching with their Suffolk, Cambridgeshire and London accents, discussing when they're going to be found. In theory, the indication is that they're in this area. They are not up at Cranji. So where are they? Now, the possibility of going missing, you can go missing for a whole bunch of stuff. But these boys are actually, their graves, they were buried at that grid reference, so we know they were in the ground. They could have been pulled up for many other reasons. They may have been, the animals may have got to them, scattered the bones, scattered the debris. But for some reason they didn't make it up to, they didn't make it up to Cranji. Possibility is they're still here. You can wave to them. Okay, what we got?
Paintings, beautiful paintings of Japanese camp prisoners, etc.
Yeah.
Library.
Yes. Yes, the Hacksworth things. Yes, and some of them are at Sime Road. We've got some of them in here. I'll show you the layout of Sime Road. Yeah. Many reasons why we should get features like this. It could be an old Chinese graveyard, and it's been dug up and taken the bodies away. But there is no sign of any headstones around it. We do find stuff like that knocking around. It's quite a nice urn jug. But there's one here, there's a couple more in the forest station over on the left-hand side. So it's all the way just in here. We know the 1st Battalion, the Cambridges, were here. The 4th Platoon were here digging in at this point. So we have these holes. So what are these holes about? Only the archaeology will hopefully prove it. Some more over there. They're close enough, they're dispersed enough. They seem to be in a nice arc facing this way across the golf course. So it makes sense that they're actually foxholes, but who knows? We don't know.
If you dug them up, what do you typically find?
Well, the lads stayed in the foxhole for about, these particular foxholes were manned for about a day. So if you imagine fighting in this, you should be strewn with personal possessions. When you're in the hole, you fire your gun, the cartridge from your gun falls out. Where does it fall out? Well, probably into the hole. So at the bottom of the hole we should find traces of British cartridges. You're also a target. So when the Japanese are fighting, they're throwing bullets at you in this direction, so hopefully we'll find a scattering of Japanese bullets. When we dig the cross section out, we should see a nice clean cut to it. where it's been dug out by hand rather than by a tree falling over, for example. So it's just not a root bolt that's fallen over. So we should be able to get some information about it. There are many, I'd just like to add again and again and again, there are many reasons why we should get holes like this in the terrain. One of the reasons is they were dug by the military. So
one back there.
we can, yeah, there's one here, there's one big one here, there's another one over there, further over towards that tree, another one over the far side there, so all the way around here. And it's one platoon, 3 sections, so it's about right for that amount of men. So watch where you're standing, guys. You never know what you're standing on. Cool? Okay, let's head.
Is the Seh Ong Cemetery, which actually means the clan cemetery of the Ongs. So this is Mrs. Ong Buntat, maiden name Bun Ching Neo. So this was only uncovered, it was completely jungled over, like all those tombs you see behind you. There are tombs out there. This was uncovered only very recently. It is the single largest tomb. There are larger tomb clusters, triple tombs, but this is the single largest tomb. Unusual also in the fact that it's a woman's tomb and it's a very small. You want to step forward and have a look. The encase looks like a tortoise shell, symbolizing longevity. Okay, so imagine this jungle over and the soldiers are hunkering down as the Japanese army comes across. Over to you, John.
Yeah. I love this place because this kind of typifies. You've got to imagine yourself, right? You're a guy from the United Kingdom. You're fresh off the boat. You've only been in theatre for 1 week, and then you finally end up coming up here to set up your positions. Okay, look at it. It doesn't make sense to you. Listen. It sounds weird. This is not the Fens. This is not Cambridgeshire. This is not Suffolk. You're standing among these. These are meant to be graves. They say it's a cemetery, but they don't look like graves you get in the United Kingdom. It's a completely alien environment. We're all sitting here with water. Where are the guys going to get their water? Where are they going to dig in? And what's going to happen to them in the next 24 hours? It's this kind of terrain that the Suffolks moved into. And notoriously, they failed to dig in. And many of the comments about the battle here was that the Suffolks didn't dig in properly. They didn't dig big slit trenches like you saw on the other side of the road. Why? Well, look at the ground. It's covered in Chinese cemetery. If you think about it, why dig in when you can put your machine gun on that ledge and fire across that way? And what they didn't comprehend is that when the shells started raining down on them, they hit this concrete and splintered it. So not only did you have the shell fragments flying around, but you had the concrete blocks flying around as well. Now, also remember, it's 9 o'clock at night. The 4th Suffolks had been fighting the previous day up on the Bukit Timah Hill on the 11th and the 12th. They'd been fighting over at Bukit Timah where they'd been well beaten. They'd been come back to here and they were told to form another line in this alien environment. They were told to hunker down and wait for the Japanese, and that's all they were told, wait for the Japanese. They were completely cut off from any kind of good intelligence. And then suddenly, 9 o'clock at night, after a long hard day, after a big bombardment has already hit you, from that direction come 400 guys from the Ichikawa regiment coming across there. And they don't fight like we fight, the Brits. They fight with things like swords. All their NCOs and officers want to come over here and chop your head off. That is not the British way of doing things, I hasten to add. The guns that the Japanese carried were about as tall as they were, and when they added the bayonets, they were actually taller than the man who was carrying them. That's an awesome weapon. These boys weren't going to have a firefight with you, they were going to put that bayonet into your chest. They were going to cut your head off with that sword. That's not what us British were used to, and this is what the Suffolks were up against. Now, according to our Bureau Records inquiries, we had a whole bunch of guys who were buried in and around this location. Only one of them is still listed as missing, and that's a guy called Private Catchpole, and he's somewhere between here and the road, his grave is. We're not quite sure. Why he wasn't picked up and all the other lads were picked up, we're not sure. But he's still listed as missing, and if he could talk, he could probably tell you how frightening it was to be here on the evening of the 14th. Claire, I'm happy with that. We want to go up to the temple for the last...
Yeah, 1 second. This one here.
What was the outcome of the battle? Sorry.
Well, yeah, good question.
Okay, we're running a little bit late.
Would you like to stop here?
If you, no, it's okay. If you guys have time, we're just going to talk a little bit. It's okay? The place, the hometown. This place is a woman, right, in China. This is her name, Chimnyo of the house of Ong. Right, so her name is Chimnyo, but she's married into the Ong household. That's how it's written. And then it says here the date of birth and death. This would be the names of the sons normally. Those of you who are Chinese will know that Ding Tong Yu Ni and Nan Zuo Ni Liu, male on the left, in other words left of the tombstone, and the female on the right. Oh, hang on, that's the right. I'll show you what that means afterwards. So as you can see, move forward, you see this little mound here. It's very small. So if you look at the tombstone, actually the feet are here and the head is higher. Alright, that's for feng shui reasons. It's rather small. It's slated for exhumation. The minister himself tried to save this one from the highway, could not. It's number 77. So this will be a very interesting one when the exhumation is documented. We do not know, but there is a custom also of burying someone in a chair, sitting down. So it's so small, it is quite possible, and we will have to see. She married into a very prominent family, as you can tell from the size of this grave. So whatever she's buried in, whatever clothes, whatever style, would also be quite telling of her social status. Now, so that's what we call a tomb shore. It ends with this little infinity pose that symbolizes fertility forever. So it's wishing that the descendants will have children on both lines, on the male line and the female line. It may not be very obvious to you, but on the male line normally it's slightly higher or slightly bigger, and that's because inheritance passes to the male line, so they are wishing that they would have a male heir. Okay. We will see the two lions. So we have a statuary that symbolizes fertility and all kinds of good wishes. So again, this would be some kind of lotus seed, fertility. If you go forward here, this is the forecourt. You see the lion over there? That's the male lion. He's holding a scroll that usually symbolizes, in those early days of the dynasties, a title bestowed on him by the king. On the female side, you will see she's suckling a lion cub. Okay, so look out for those things when you're walking around the cemetery. Okay, forecourt. You saw this now when we arrived. I tried to clear it a little bit. In the Chinese, they believe that if you clear the forecourt, it's good feng shui for your descendants. It's a belief that the dead, if it's buried well, her bones are in there, it's gathering the water, it's gathering the qi. So good qi, and in the Chinese, again, those of you who know Mandarin, 有骨气. Gu means bone, and qi is the qi around the tomb. Alright, so let's move forward.
So excuse me.
Yeah?
When they exhume the graves, what do they do with them?
We can talk about it in a little bit. Let me finish this. Okay, tomb design. Okay, so you see a half moon shape here, alright? We're talking about the qi and the air and all that. The water flows down, okay? Forgive me. So the water flows down from here when it rains. You see this channel?
Yeah.
Water flows down, and also there's some underground channel in this one. We know this because it flows out here. Water does not flow straight in feng shui, it has to curve. The grave here goes all the way down. Alright? So this tomb was designed with feng shui in mind. If you step a little bit backward, you see that I'm standing on the fish. There's a pair of fishes, one on each side, trying to catch the water. Okay? Where my brother is standing right here, you see sharp little three pointy things. These are the dragon's claws. On the other side, not pointy things, rounded ones, are the tiger's paw. Alright, Jing Long Bai Hu. Those of you who know Mandarin, right? Again, so you see this feng shui design. The whole thing is circular. We have an aerial picture, the shot from high up using a pole, and you can see it. This is a magnificent tomb. Unfortunately, it's not really safe. These are what the locals call Peranakan tiles. Now, tombs are normally built by the people, these descendants. So obviously the children pick the tiles. So this usually looks at the fashion of those days. They are normally called Peranakan tiles because Peranakans had Western education, and they know that the British favoured Victorian tiles, Linton tiles. So these are actually Victorian tiles. Alright? Obviously a person of stature had an English education. So the tomb has English words besides the traditional Chinese ones. Alright, so just give you an idea of what you're looking out for when you look at the tomb. They're not usually this big, and they don't always have such good feng shui elements, but this one in particular does have. Do you see a tiny one at the corner there? That is not another tombstone, that is actually the earth deity. That is to thank the earth deity for giving her this place to lie forever. Well, it was forever then. So this is the feng shui of Chinese tombs. Alright? So from here we go on to Bukit Brown.
What about you?
I'll hold on to it.
Why are we standing in this particular car park, which doesn't seem to have much around it apart from more Chinese graves? Well, this is actually the temple site. Our colleagues here can tell you more about the function of the temple site. But for us, let's get our soldier's hat on again, our Suffolk's hat on, our Ichikawa Battalion hat on. You've got to imagine this landscape with less foliage. Less foliage. The only sight you could see from the golf course, which is in that direction, the only thing that Shimada could make out on the hill was this temple. So this must have been clearer sight for him, being able to see across from his tanks and look across here. And it became the significant focal point for the attack by the battalion, by the Japanese. Why? Well, it makes sense. If there's nowhere else you can go on the battlefield, if you get lost, head to the high point, head to the temple, and we'll rendezvous. Yeah.
Temple compounds. Just give you a sense, alright? But John's going to continue talking about the battle.
Yes, so looking out from the Japanese position on the golf course, Shimada and his tanks, this is the complex. It's the only thing you can see in the break of the whole of the foliage. Remember, this is at night as well, so he's raining in shells, and hopefully they're going to illuminate this place up so the Japanese attackers can actually get here. And you've just done the line of the attack that the Ichikawa guys took. They came up the Sime Road, up the Kheam Hock Road, turned left, came through the main gates, and ended up coming up here, smashing their way through, bayoneting any Suffolks they got in their way. If you get lost in the middle of the night, you know to come up to the high ground, find this temple complex, and you can rendezvous there. That's why it became a strategic point. The final part of the battle, Ichikawa coming through here, they smash their way through, they bayonet the Suffolks. The Suffolks then start a hellish journey trying to get back. Head east, young man, just go that way. You'll find you'll run into Allied troops in that direction. Now, you best to come up here at night and try it, because what you got to do is strike out through that kind of foliage, heading that direction. You haven't got a compass. They didn't give the Brits compasses. Only the officers had compasses. So as an individual soldier, you get caught out here. You know you have to go that way. How do you get there? It's up to you. By the time the Japanese got up here, they turned round. They had signalling lights set up, and they started flashing the message back. They sent flares up as well to say, green flare, to say that they captured this position. Shimada then rolled his tanks up. He started rolling them up to the main road. He couldn't come up here because of the gravestones. So he gets onto the main road at Lornie, turns left and heads off down towards Thompson village. He gets halfway round between here and Thompson, and his first tank commanded by a guy called Lieutenant Masuda, is hit by a 2-pounder anti-tank gun and stops the advance. Shimada's tanks pull up behind him, they go forward, the tank looks like it's in perfect condition. The only survivor is the gunner. He pulls himself out, turns around and says, you don't really want to have a look what's inside there. And all the tank crew, the shell had gone in and started ricocheting around the inside of the tank, and the tank crew had just been decimated, been destroyed inside the tank itself. The tank then burst into flames and started popping as the live ammunition went off, completely blocked the road. Shimada pulled off to the right and headed his tanks, bypassed, and managed to get them onto the next hill to be able to put fire down on what he called British reinforcements who were gathering just at the bottom of the hill here. Finally, the rest of his tank regiment came up and they pushed towards Thompson. By the end of the 15th, by the early morning of the 15th, those tanks had seized the reservoir, and therefore pressure came on. On the 15th, in the afternoon of the 15th, General Percival drives up Bukit Road. Looking to the right, he could hear the gunfire, he could hear the fighting going on up at Adam Park and up here, and he's going off to surrender at the Ford factory. So this area here marks the last kind of major attack, the high tide for the Japanese. Units of the 11th Regiment made it as far as Mount Pleasant. You'd be glad to know that the survivors of the 4th Suffolks also made it to Mount Pleasant Housing Estate. And again, in Guns of February, in that book, it tells you about an attack by a company of the 11th Regiment on Hospital Hill, which is now the police officers' mess at Mount Pleasant down there. They launched an attack and they lost a whole company of men. 100 guys ran up the side of the hill towards the black and white house. The remains of the 4th Suffolks were in there and they just mowed them down as they came up the hill. So the 4th Suffolks had the last laugh in this particular fight. But by the time they got here, the Japanese knew, and Percival knew, the game was over because the tanks had made it all the way down to Thompson Road. Archaeology. We're going to find these lads up here. This is the terrain we've got to do the archaeology in. Somebody compared it to looking for a needle in a pile of needles. Where's better to find a dead person than in a cemetery? The guys of the 4th Suffolks weren't buried with any headstones. They weren't buried with any reference apart from a high-level grid reference. They are scattered around this hillside somewhere in this terrain. And the question is, can we find them? I suppose one of the benefits of the development is that there is an opportunity. There is a window. This area will be cleared. And as they're clearing it, maybe, possibly, they'll come across the evidence of dead people, but guys with helmets and with military buttons. If they do so, then we know who they are and we can return them to Kranji and tell their next of kin. So that's the hope. Finding them, if we left this terrain as it is, finding them in this kind of terrain for an archaeologist would be needle in a haystack job. It would be very, very difficult. However, there is a plus. After the fighting, the local tomb keepers and the locals around here suggested that many of the guys were gathered together in trucks by the Japanese and by POW work parties and buried in wells around the place. And the wells around here are filled with equipment and bodies. And if that is the case, if we can identify where those wells are, then maybe we can do the archaeology on those and follow up that lead, and perhaps we can find the bodies in the bottom of the well. Also, reputedly, further down into the estate, there is a mass grave site which has been recorded in the burial registers as a mass grave. It seemed to be filled round about the 17th and 18th of February. It's a few days after the fighting. If there is a mass grave down there, then the likelihood is one of the things they were throwing into that mass grave would be the bodies of military men. And so again, if we do excavate that grave, I believe it's been looked at to actually get us done to do some surveying on it. If it is a mass grave, then we could come across the Suffolks, the missing Suffolks, actually being gathered together and put into the one mass grave or a couple of mass graves on site, which would be great.
The burial register and our talks with the tomb keepers were old enough to remember this. We have identified certain sites as possible mass graves, and we have conveyed this information to the documentation team.
Documentation team have asked the archaeologists at NUS to come to get together a project plan, basically, to go and see if we can actually do some test sampling of the pit to make sure it is, first of all, a mass burial site. And then, hopefully, we can hand that over to the authorities who will have to exhume the grave just as they would a marked one and see what comes out of it. and we haven't found these Suffolks yet.
So how many are you looking for?
There are 23 Suffolks missing in this area. That includes guys down on Hill 95, the guys down at the golf clubhouse, the guys on the corner of the wood, the 4 guys there. There's a guy opposite in the housing estate opposite, and there's 3 or 4 of the guys up in this area as well that we know of. That's just the Suffolks. You've got to remember there's a whole other bunch of soldiers moving around this area, and there'll be other British Allied servicemen caught up in the fighting up here who are missing, but we just haven't got specific grid references for them yet. They're missing. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the tour. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you stayed watered and fresh and it wasn't too arduous. That was a long trek. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
And again, tell your friends.
Thank you, very good.